I just keep thinking about him. Kate's mum smiled. The stupidest things, like him always complaining that the tea wasn't strong enough. Auntie Lynn let out a snort of laughter. Dad only drank tea if it was strong enough to take the paint off the mugs. Who knows what it did to his insides? He must have had a cast iron stomach. Kate listened to them talking over her head and blinked worriedly. Was that what had happened? All those mugs of tea had done something awful to Granddad's stomach. But Mum and Auntie Lynn were laughing, so it couldn't be true. She wanted to join in, to say that Grandad was brilliant at dunking biscuits, and his biscuits never fell apart in his tea, ever. He let Kate dunk them too, but she always whipped them out again after a couple of seconds, just in case they crumbled. And actually, because she didn't really like the taste of tea, she only did it because Grandad did. She wanted to say it, but somehow the words wouldn't come out of her mouth. She just stayed sitting silently on the sofa between Mum and Auntie Lynn, listening. All those stories. Her dad was telling them too, and Mrs. Eversley, Grandad's friend from down the road, and a couple of other people, relatives who'd come for the funeral. Mum had told Kate who they were, but there were so many people around and she just couldn't remember. They'd all known Grandad, and everyone seemed to have something to say. Grandad wearing odd shoes to the supermarket. Grandad flying a kite with Kate in the park. Everyone looked at her when Dad said that, but Kate still couldn't say anything. Grandad taking ages to walk down the street on sunny days because he had to stop and say hello to all the sunbathing cats. That made Kate smile. It was so true. He'd nearly made her and Molly late for school a few weeks back. That black cat from the house on the corner had rolled on its back on the dusty pavement and then followed them down the street. They'd had to stop and shoo it home just in case it tried to cross the road. Kate smiled and then bit her bottom lip hard to make herself stop. She mustn't smile. Grandad was dead. How could she be happy? She didn't understand how everyone could tell stories and laugh. Her words were building up inside her, all the things she wanted to say too, but couldn't. They hurt, deep inside her chest, much more than her bitten lip did. Grandad had walked them to school every day, and usually he picked them up again too. That was making Kate feel even worse. What would happen after the Easter holidays when they went back to school? Who would pick them up now? Kate sank her chin down under the neck of her best cardigan and tried not to cry anymore. Her eyes were aching. She supposed it was mean to be worrying about who was going to take them to school and back. It seemed selfish, but she couldn't help thinking about it. Grandad had always been there, and now he wasn't. Until a week ago, he'd lived in the little flat that used to be the garage at the side of Kate's house. He'd been there for 4 years, half as long as Kate had been alive. And even before that, he'd lived close by, in the house he'd shared with Kate's gran, 5 minutes' walk away. Kate didn't remember Gran much at all, as she'd died when Kate was only a baby. Grandad had been lonely living on his own, so he'd come to live with them. Now it felt to Kate as if he'd always been there. Grandad had cooked tea sometimes too, if Mum and Dad had to work really late. He made brilliant cheese on toast, which was lucky because it was all he ever made, that and toffee, but Kate didn't mind. They were 2 of her favourite things. The voices went on murmuring over her head, and still her stories were locked away inside her. Kate felt as though she couldn't stand it any longer. She wriggled out from between her mum and Auntie Lynn and threaded her way through everyone's legs. "Are you all right, Kate?" her mum asked, turning away from listening to Mrs. Eversley for a moment. Just going upstairs for a bit." "Molly's upstairs too," her mum suggested. "You could go and sit with her." Kate nodded, but she knew that she wouldn't. Molly's bedroom door would be tight shut, and if Kate interrupted her, she'd probably get yelled at. She climbed the stairs wearily, wondering what to do. She was tired, but it was too early to go to bed. It was only about 6 o'clock. On a usual day, Mum and Dad would just be getting home from work. Kate would have been pottering around the garden with Grandad, or sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework or drawing. She stopped on the top step of the stairs, sniffing. Molly's door was shut, and there was a notice on it that said, "Go away," in very large black letters. And underneath, in smaller pink letters, it said, "This means you." There was no point even asking if she could be with her sister. But as Kate pushed her own bedroom door, just next to Molly's, she already knew she couldn't stay in there either. Her room was full of things that she ought to want to be doing, like her jewellery kit and a book of disgusting science experiments. But Grandad had bought her that. He promised to help her with it, and her fingers felt too tired and sausage-like for threading beads today. She jumped as Molly's bedroom door opened very suddenly, and her sister glared out, red-eyed and grumpy. "What do you want? Why are you just standing there?" "I'm not," Kate said at once, even though she was. I'm standing in my room. Go away." She took a small step further into her room to make it true, and Molly sighed huffily and whisked back. Kate heard the bed springs wheeze as Molly flung herself down. Kate stood in the doorway and sighed at her room. Usually, she loved to curl up on the scruffy old armchair by the window. Even if she was in a bad mood, or she had a fight with Molly, the faded plush fabric and musty smell made her feel better. Today, it wasn't enough. But there was a striped, droopy-whiskered face squashed between the cushions. Kate picked up Amos and hugged him tight. He was saggy, and his fur stuck up in odd spikes from being squashed under Kate's chin when she was asleep, but he still looked proud and brave and wise like a real tiger. It was silly, Kate thought, sniffing again, that Amos could make her feel so much better and so much worse at the same time. He always made her happy because he was her favourite toy, her best and most special thing. But Amos had been a present from Granddad 2 years ago. He even looked like Granddad a little bit, with the same fabulous furry eyebrows over his yellow marbly eyes. Granddad's eyes had peered out from under his eyebrows just like that, the last time she'd seen him. They'd been in the shed, Granddad humming to himself and looking at his seed catalogues, and Kate sitting next to him writing. Another story about a brave, fierce princess and her pet tiger. She'd been writing it for months, in episodes and with pictures too. Granddad had read Kate's story and twitched his eyebrows at all the best bits. She would go to the shed, Kate decided, brushing Amos's furry eyebrows against her cheek. She could even look at the seed catalogues. She loved them. The pictures of the flowers were nice enough, but the names were brilliant. Most of her characters' names had come out of Granddad's catalogues. Her princess was called Gloriosa, Glory for short, and the evil witch who kept trying to steal Amos was called Scabiosa. Scabiosa were actually quite pretty flowers, like fluffy little pom-poms, but they sounded wart-encrusted and witch-like. "Where are you going?" Molly growled as Kate passed her door again. "Downstairs?" It was true, even if she wasn't planning to stay there. "Why have you got that ratty toy tiger? You're 8, not 4. You're too big to be carrying toys around." Kate stared back at Molly, wondering why she had to be so mean. Molly had toys as well, a whole shelf full of dolls that she swore she didn't ever play with, but she still wouldn't let Mum give them to the charity shop. And they weren't dusty either, like things that never got touched. Kate knew that Molly brushed their hair and held them, but only when she was sure no one could see her. Maybe when she was 10, she wouldn't want Amos, Kate thought, and tears burned her eyes again. She didn't want to be that old, that horrible. "You look like a baby," Molly snapped, propping herself up on her elbows and glaring at Kate. "Oh, stop crying. You ought to throw that stupid old thing away." She wriggled upright, reaching out as though she was going to snatch Amos, and Kate darted away with a frightened squeak. "No!" Kate ran down the stairs in a rush. She'd meant to creep down step by step to make sure Mum or Dad didn't hear her. She didn't want to explain why she was going outside. Kate had a feeling that Mum would say sitting in Granddad's shed was silly or wrong somehow. She couldn't see why. It was just like telling stories about him, except that she wanted to be in the story instead, with all the things that reminded her of Granddad.